Welcome to a deep dive into a world you might think you know. But trust me, there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely.
We're diving into the history and culture of crossword puzzles.
Fascinating stuff.
And guiding us is The Riddles of the Sphinx, Inheriting the Feminist History by Anna Shechtman.
Not your typical puzzle book. Shechtman connects crosswords to feminism, technology, even our own identities. Makes you really rethink those little squares.
Right, like who knew? And she starts with this comparison to the riddle of the Sphinx.
Oedipus and all that.
Exactly. Oedipus solved it, but remember, the Sphinx was this powerful, mysterious figure, and Shechtman points out she's defeated by a riddle she couldn't answer.
Interesting.
It plays into this whole idea of women being both powerful, but also inherently flawed.
I see where she's going with this. It's like this deep-seated societal view of women. Enigmatic puzzles to be solved, and their power is often what brings them down.
Exactly. And Shechtman uses this to frame how we talk about crosswords, women, power, even language itself. It's all connected.
It's a really clever way in.
So let's dive into the details. How does this play out in the world of crosswords specifically?
Well, picture the early 20th century.
Yeah.
Crosswords, they were seen as this leisurely pursuit, something for housewives to do in their spare time.
Right, but Shechtman uncovers this surprising role women actually played, right?
Absolutely. They weren't just passively solving, they were shaping the puzzles from the beginning.
Like Ruth Hale, a huge advocate for women's rights, but found solace in these diagramless puzzles.
Exactly. And for her, it wasn't just a hobby. She famously fought to keep her own name after marriage.
Wow.
And Shechtman argues that Hale's love for these diagramless puzzles, it reflects this tension between freedom and societal expectations.
How soon?
Well, think about it. A diagramless puzzle, it looks like a blank slate.
Right.
But there's this hidden structure underneath. It's like she's navigating a world with these invisible rules, just like the societal expectations placed on women.
Such a cool connection. And then there's Margaret Farrar. She basically made the New York Times crossword what it is.
Oh, Farrar's influence is huge. Meticulous, carefully crafting clues, setting the standard, all while being a wife and mother in the 1920s.
Hard to imagine her finding the time to edit thousands of puzzles before computers existed.
It's remarkable.
But that makes you think, by choosing the words, deciding what's puzzle-worthy, she's deciding whose knowledge matters, shaping the audience.
It's a subtle kind of gatekeeping.
Absolutely, whose stories get told. And Shechtman even points to clues from back then, like Angelina's blood, the answer being type A,
Yeah.
reflects a very particular view of successful women, doesn't it?
Definitely a sign of the times.
It's wild how something as simple as a crossword clue can have these hidden biases.
They're everywhere once you start looking.
Speaking of, the book goes into this whole thing called écriture féminine. Honestly, it sounds a bit intimidating.
Don't worry, it's not as complex as it sounds. At its core, it's celebrating the many ways women express themselves. Breaking free from traditional language, finding new ways to articulate the female experience.
Okay, that makes sense, but how does that translate to crosswords? They seem very structured, lots of rules.
And that's where Julia Penelope comes in, a linguist who actually used crosswords to challenge sexist language and champion lesbian identity.
So she's using puzzles as activism.
Yeah, exactly. Penelope saw language as this battleground, and she was out there using wit, right, to challenge those dominant narratives.
You like it.
Creating crosswords that celebrate these marginalized voices, making people question the very words they use every day.
Shechtman even calls them consciousness-raising, right? Penelope's puzzles.
Right, it's about how language shapes how we see the world, right. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Shechtman connects this to technology's impact on crosswords too.
Because just like language, tech can either reinforce the power structures or challenge them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about those human computers like from the movie Hidden Figures.
Right.
Women were essential in those early days, just like with crosswords. But as both of these things got more tech-driven, they also became more male-dominated.
It's a pattern, isn't it? Throughout history, women do the groundwork. Then when a field gains prestige, out they go.
It's uncanny how often that happens.
I wonder, did Margaret Farrar, with her strict puzzle-worthy words, did she contribute to that at all?
That's a good question. I mean, it's unlikely she meant any harm.
Right, of course.
But by emphasizing a certain type of knowledge,
Yeah.
maybe she accidentally created a space that women weren't as welcome in, especially as tech reshaped everything.
So we see this shift to a more masculine image, both in making the crosswords and in computer stuff.
And it's interesting, right? These fields, they were once seen as meticulous, detail-oriented, almost feminine, you could say.
And then they become technical, prestigious, and boom, the image changes.
Exactly. And that's where Shechtman brings up this idea of cruel optimism.
Okay, I've heard that phrase before, but I'm not sure I fully get it.
So it's like this. For women doing crosswords, it can feel empowering, right? Like you're expanding your knowledge.
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, you're actually trapping yourself by playing by someone else's rules.
So even though it feels good, challenging yourself, maybe we're conforming without realizing it, that's cruel optimism.
You got it. And Shechtman connects this to her own struggles with anorexia, actually.
Oh, wow.
She says, trying to be thin, it gave her a sense of control. She was choosing it, but really it was keeping her trapped in these societal expectations.
So it's about being aware of the bigger picture. Even with fun stuff, are we really challenging ourselves or just going along with it?
That's the question she wants us to ask. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom. The book also highlights women like Elizabeth Gorski.
What did she do?
She's a trailblazer, bringing new words, new ideas into crosswords for decades, made way for more diverse voices.
And now there are platforms like the Incubator, right? Specifically for puzzles by women.
Exactly. Challenging those old norms, creating a more inclusive space.
So they're expanding what even counts as puzzle-worthy, right? Pop culture, feminist theory, stuff that was ignored before.
It's like they're saying, hey, crosswords can be fun and smart, reflecting all these different points of view.
I love that. Not just stuck in one way of thinking.
Right. It's proof that crosswords can be this platform for representation, for actually challenging the status quo.
It's really cool to see how these women are taking back the crossword, making it a space for creativity, for social commentary even.
It definitely makes you think about your own relationship to puzzles. Like, what are we actually getting out of them? Are we just accepting what's given to us? Or are we really engaging with those biases even that might be hidden in there?
It's like Shechtman wants us to bring that critical thinking even to our fun time,
Yeah, she really pushes us on that. And she ends on this thought. This idea of cruel optimism, especially when it comes to activities like crosswords. And it can apply to anyone, but especially folks whose labor often gets overlooked.
I think we've touched on that throughout our conversation, but it's worth circling back. What does she mean by cruel optimism exactly?
It's this tricky thing, right, where we pour all this time, energy into something we think is empowering. But really, it might be reinforcing the very things that hold us back. Like we're stuck, but it feels good, so we don't notice.
It makes you question everything, and Shechtman connects it to her own experience with anorexia. It's really personal.
Right. She talks about how trying to be thin, it felt self-directed, like she was choosing it, but it was really about fitting into these societal expectations, seeking validation in a system that often devalues women.
So she's not saying all our passions are bad, but we gotta be more aware. Why do we do the things we do? Who benefits? Do these systems actually serve us?
Exactly. It's about asking those tough questions. Even with harmless stuff, there are these bigger forces at play. And to really break free, we have to be critical, even of the things we enjoy.
It's almost like, what were we saying about Margaret Farrar and puzzle-worthy words?
Exactly. Whose knowledge matters, whose voices get amplified. Are we challenging the rules or just playing along?
Man, that's a lot to think about. I have to say, this whole conversation has totally changed how I see crosswords. I'll never look at a puzzle the same way again.
That's the power of Shechtman's work, right? She takes something so familiar, so seemingly simple, and she just peels back all these layers. History, culture, personal journeys. It's all there.
It's been a journey for sure. So for our listeners, if you're up for a read that will make you question everything, grab The Riddles of the Sphinx. It's language, gender, searching for meaning, really gets you thinking.
Hey, next time you're doing a crossword, don't just solve it. Question it. The words, the clues, what's hidden in plain sight. You might surprise yourself with what you find.
So true. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll be back next time with another exploration into the unexpected.